Hello, everyone. You guys seemed ready to get started before I did, so I can tell there's a lot of excitement about tonight's program. So good evening and welcome to the Jewish Museum. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the manager of public programs here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, What's at Stake for Abstract Painting and Where Do We Go From Here? Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank Bob Nickas and all of our panelists this evening, as well as Norman Kleeblatt and Stephen Brown, who are the curators behind From the Margins, Lee Krasner and Norman Lewis, 1945 to 1952. And this program was in a way inspired by that exhibition. The next related program to that show will be an improvisational jazz concert featuring Steve Coleman, Jonathan Finlayson, and Anthony Tidd as part of our year-long partnership with Bang on a Can, and that will take place on Thursday, November 6th at 7:30 p.m. For full details about all of our upcoming programs and events, please visit our website or sign up for our e-news. Bob Nickas is a critic and curator based in New York. He has organized more than 80 exhibitions since 1984 and served as curatorial advisor at PS1 MoMA from 2004 to 2007. Among his exhibitions at PS1 are Lee Lozano, Drawn from Life, William Gendy, Christopher Wool, Into the Night, Stephen Shore, American Surfaces, Wolfgang Tillman's Freedom from the Known, and The Painted World. He served on the curatorial teams which organized the 2003 Biennale de Lyon and Greater New York 2005. His books include Live Free or Die, Collected Writings 1985 to 99, Theft is Vision, and Painting Abstraction, New Elements in Abstract Painting, and Catalog of the Exhibition. He is one of the authors of Defining Contemporary Art, 25 Years in 200 Pivotal Artworks, and his writings have been featured in Artforum, Frieze, and Moose, as well as numerous other monographs and catalogs. So please take a moment to silence your cell phones before we begin. Join me in welcoming Bob Nickas, Joanne Greenbaum, Philip Taaffe, and Stanley Whitney.
Thank you, Jenna. On behalf of myself and the panelists, I'd like to thank Jenna Weiss and the Jewish Museum for extending the invitation to present tonight's panel. The artists on the panel this evening are all New York based. I've written about their work. I've shown their work over the years. They all exhibit internationally. I'm going to keep their bios to the bare minimum. Joanne Greenbaum is represented here in New York by Rachel Uffner Gallery. And she has a show of new paintings opening in 2 weeks at Gallery Krone in Berlin. Philip Taaffe is represented here by Loring Augustine, and he will have a show in their Bushwick space opening on January 16. And Stanley Whitney is represented by Team Gallery, and he has a show opening at Team's new gallery space in Los Angeles on February 1st. I have a very short statement to start things off. And also, our subject, What's at Stake for Abstract Painting Today, has its origins in the renewed interest in abstraction in recent years, in parallel to the phenomenon of a whole host of paintings that are often neither painted nor phenomenal. Much of this art has found favor with the kind of buyers who are also sellers, and most of this art is made by men who were born, as we discover in the auction catalogs, between 1980 and 1989. Now, every generation deserves their turn, and yet part of my motives for this panel arise from what their contribution, collectively speaking, represents, which I see as a turn for the worse. Materially, in the description of their art, we find that they employ resin, hand-woven cotton, digital printing, dyes, inkjet, molding paste, silver deposit, 3M Scotch Light, bleach, and so on. In its promotion, much of the emphasis is placed on the art's conceptualism and process, of which I'm seriously doubtful. Every work of art involves a process, even a ready-made. And of course, ideas and conceptual thinking are not the same thing and are not so easily interchangeable. While there's not a lot of actual paint involved in this art, and some of these artists will insist that they really aren't painters, their art occupies the space of painting, both physically and in terms of critical promotional language. The actual language of painting, historically, its vocabulary and articulation, has always been furthered by exploration, by the use of new materials, and by certain antagonisms, equally mischievous and purposeful, as well as by a kind of art historical patricide. We might ask, does every painter kill the thing he loves? At least the Romantics do. And every painter, and this includes artists who engage even reluctantly with the medium, has to find a new way to go forward. My sense of the latest wave of unpainted abstraction, however, is that it is, in fact, going backward, self-satisfied and rather happily. This would at least be tolerable, if not for the prospect of what it may lead to, further repetitions blandly chasing their tails. Because among today's more ambitious and practical artists, you have those who tend to look at what came immediately before, what has been shown successfully in the galleries, what has been sold and resold, and at which price, and conceive, or rather contrive, a better, cheaper version that can be identified as a brand to enter the market as quickly as possible. Now, if this sounds like fashion, which has to reinvent itself every season, is more and more conservative, and takes few chances, it's easy to see the similarities. Getting oneself into this sped-up cycle has its dangers. As I often say, why should anyone be in a hurry to be discovered? Isn't that the same as being in a hurry to be forgotten? For the world of art and artists, for anyone who truly cares about art, this is a disaster in the making. I refer to it only half-jokingly as the menudo factor. Young artists as a kind of boy band where every one of them, once used up and past their prime, is infinitely replaceable by a line of hopefuls stretching between art schools and galleries as far as the eye can see. They help to keep running smoothly and efficiently what John Miller has termed painting as a service industry. Art is long and life is short, and it's never been more true. But in this increasingly warped world of ours, its truth has created a new imperative to be up and running as a viable commodity, publicly and privately traded by the age of 25. Anyone who's been making art over the course of a long career, all the panelists have, anyone who's been making art over the course of a long career must surely remember their earlier incarnations as half-formed at best. Art takes time and it can't be hurried along. Before the conversation begins, I'd like to comment briefly on the image projected behind us. This is one of the now famous photographs by Cecil Baton in which the Jackson Pollock paintings Autumn Rhythm, Lavender Mist, and number 27 were used as a backdrop for a fashion spread published in a 1951 issue of Vogue magazine. I consider this now iconic image, perhaps more iconic as an image than that of the paintings reproduced on their own, to be the proverbial beginning of the end. Art reduced to a backdrop for the privileged and fashion conscious. Art is part of the stage set, wrested from whatever meaning the artist intended, meant instead to allow for the pose to be struck, for the shutter to be clicked, and for the image existing in multiplicity to enter the consciousness of a particular social stratosphere. And the painter? The painter has already been dispensed with. Joanne Greenbaum, I'm going to open it up to Joanne Greenbaum, and I'm not going to end Philip Taaffe and Stanley Whitney. This didn't take them by surprise. I sent it to them 2 days ago. You have something to say?
Okay. Well, when Bob asked me to be on this panel, I, of course, panicked because I thought, well, I don't really have anything to say. I just do my work and try not to say much. But we met last week, and Bob said, you know, why don't you start off by talking about, you know, kind of what goes on in your studio a little bit, and how you feel that what you do every day, how is that moving painting along, and what the activity in the studio actually is on a day-to-day basis, and also what it means to me kind of in my life, and also how that's probably a lot different than a lot of the assembly line painting that we do see very often. I just, so you know, I mean, everyone who knows my work here, I don't paint on an assembly line. I don't have a factory set up in my studio. Every time I start something, it's pretty much, I try to very much have a fresh a fresh and clear mind. I feel that it's my responsibility to at least try to move abstract painting along, even if it's just for what I do in my studio, that I would be bored doing the same painting twice. So every time I make a painting, I really try to make it new for myself, even if it's materials. Sometimes the new materials that I've been using dictate how that painting comes along. Sometimes I try to start a painting sometimes in all different ways. So in terms of fashion and beauty and all of these things, that's just a byproduct, because I have a vocabulary and a language that I work with over and over again, but it's always changing, and I'm not calling myself a conceptual painter. However, my work is very much about thinking and ideas.
I want to just jump in and say I've put up a few images of Joanne's paintings as she was speaking. I'm going to do that for each artist. But I wanted to say, over many years of going to Joanne's studio, you sometimes see a painting, and I don't know how long she's been working on it, but then I come back and it's the same. Can't believe it's the same painting. It's a whole other painting. You could say that the actual studio practice is a process, where today the process is sort of just a step or a very simple idea that someone makes. I'm going to just jump ahead to way ahead. Oh yeah, this is a show that's up now. And this artist is, I think he's Norwegian, Fredrik Verslev. I don't know that I'm pronouncing it exactly right. It's at unconcerned Gallery. So it's a whole series of paintings with some sort of device that's used on football fields and soccer fields to mark out the lines. I guess they put some kind of chalk. And so he's adapted that and brought it to the studio, and the canvas is on the floor. And they wheel these things across with paint and so on. And there's a lot of them, and well, you get the idea. But that would be like, oh, that's conceptual. That's the idea. This is the process. But I think, going back to Joanne, that the process is really a matter of going to the studio each day and working.
Yes.
It can't be reduced to a gimmick. You don't see the wheelbarrow that spreads the paint across or spills it across or whatever it does.
No.
Philip, do you want to pick up from going to the studio every day and working?
I think that art is visual research, and I've always been interested, and I love painting, and I love historical painting. I said I'm of the Gertrude Stein school of loving painting, all kinds of painting. I do like the engagement of paint and surface, and I've seen a lot, and I continue to look, and I'm very open-minded and very tolerant, but I do have a limited amount of time to devote to seeing everything, the proliferation of exhibitions. I remember coming up when I was a student, I would go to 420 West Broadway, and every month, and I'd go to Paula Cooper Gallery, and I'd go to a few shows in Soho and to the museums, and that really was provided me with a great deal of information, and I've always tried to see as much as possible and consider historical work as a point of departure, as a reference point.
Well, for example, the first picture that I chose, it's called Adam and Eve. It's from 1984, and it's obviously based on what you would call a kind of dissection of the wave pattern in a Bridget Riley.
Right.
I think one of the problems that, and we are all of a generation that came up during appropriation. Of course, today you could say every artist is an appropriation artist. But I often think that it's related to music. In other words, you have certain tunes and certain songs, and lots of people will record them over the years, but there's no point in recording it if you don't do something with it or make it your own. And obviously you took Opticality, you took Barnett Newman, you took Bridget Riley and so on, and did something with it. My bias today is I think a lot of artists come along and they're really looking at what just came before, and they're doing some slight, in other words, it's so close in time. When you were doing this, you were looking at things from the 60s and the 50s. Today, people are looking at things from 18 months prior.
Well, she really benefited from my interest in her work.
She didn't like it.
She did not like it, but she pretended as though she did. I went to a show of hers.
She went to your studio to snoop around.
Yes, she came to my studio very early in the morning, and surprisingly, she said, "Is there somewhere around here we can get a drink?" It was like 9:30 in the morning, and I took her to a bar, and she downed 3 Bloody Marys, and I was in shock, and so then we went back to my studio. And
every artist has a different process.
She was in a relatively good frame of mind, and she seemed to, I'm saying I mean this as a kind of liturgical reenactment. I'm very interested in sacred liturgy. I like the idea of having this intimate relationship with how do you make these things? And I said I know about Assyrian bas-relief sculpture, and I think that your work came out of Assyrian bas-relief sculpture, and said that didn't register at all with her particularly. But I still see that. But
yeah.
So I don't know. No, I don't think she. And then she went back to London and she started bad-mouthing me. I heard that she was saying things that
all publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, I suppose. But Stanley, I was trying to find out what kind of artist I was. I knew, and I was a student of Hans Haacke at Cooper Union, and of course I was doing anything but make paintings in art school, because that was seen as very uncritical and déclassé and not, is not to be pursued. I mean, he could not entertain a painting. If you brought a painting to his class, you'd undergo severe criticism. I suppose that was good for me. I mean, that enabled me to be able to justify or find a way forward in a very particular way, in a very focused way.
Stanley, you were saying something earlier that I found really interesting. You worked selling art materials at one time when you were young at Pearl Paint, and you mentioned Barnett Newman would come himself to buy canvas, which you'd cut for him.
Yeah.
And how much canvas would he buy at a time?
Well, he'd buy just enough for the painting.
For one painting?
One painting. He'd buy...
how times have changed. How times have
Barnett
changed.
would buy just what he needed. If he needed a tube of red or...
And he didn't send someone to do it.
He would... I came to town really early. I first came to town in '68, and I worked at the Strand bookstore for a while, and then I got a job working at Pearl Paint, and Pearl Paint turned into an art supply store. They were used to sell house paint, but they had an art supply store, and there were 3 of us. And that's when everyone was really involved with acrylic. And so all the artists that's when early Soho, so all the artists would come there and buy work, buy supplies. And it was great because this is one thing I think is true. I was talking to Marina about this, is that I came to town, I was able to, not that I was friends with Barnett, but I was able to watch him and talk to him. He'd come and buy his stuff. I cut canvas for him. I remember once I got a piece of canvas for him, and I stepped on the edge of it, and he sent it back. And I cleaned it off. I thought, well, it's clean enough.
See,
and he sent it back, and I thought, why isn't it? But he wouldn't paint on it. He would check out the whole weave. He'd check out the whole weave.
Today, if you stepped on the canvas, they would hire you as a studio assistant.
Yeah, I'd probably get paid. I might get paid. For that. But trying to get it, I think it was interesting to be able to participate and be involved and watch these older artists. And then for a while, I got to, through some friends of mine, Al Taylor and his wife Debbie Taylor, to hang out at Bob Rauschenberg's for a long time. And Bob Rauschenberg wasn't an artist when I came out of school I particularly wanted to meet. But I didn't think I did. But just to be able to and watch these artists and be around these artists. Mm. And I like talking about, Philip's talking about going to see shows. I think, you know, even if you're living out in Bushwick, it's hard, you know, do you really want to come into Chelsea, you know, that far to see shows? Or where galleries are now, like in Chelsea? I think all that has a big effect on what people do. And the economics too. I mean, myself as an artist, as a painter, you know, basically I paint by myself. I don't think my son, who's like 20 years old, ever see me paint. You know, I don't paint when anyone's around. I paint totally by myself. Although when I clean up, I wish I had someone around to clean up. But I paint by myself, and it's a real personal kind of engagement. And I think I tend to look at painting, whether it's abstract or figurative or whatever art, I tend to look at painting and think painting is this long tradition and very much part of the tradition. But I think the thing about painting is that painting doesn't really, I mean, it does change, but it doesn't change that much. And I think that's something about painting where it just takes a real stance.
You know, one of the, I'm not sure how I ended up reading this book as a way of preparing. I don't think I was preparing for this panel. I was just reading this book right before. It's the afternoon interviews, Marcel Duchamp, and they're the interviews with Calvin Tompkins that were done in 1964. Well, it was 50 years ago, and yet when you read this book, and Duchamp he's complaining about a lot of things, and it sounds like someone talking today. So all of the big complaints haven't changed in 50 years. I mean, he talks about how there's so much money, and the whole monetization of art has kind of ruined younger artists, and younger artists don't really have a lot of imagination. They're just kind of taking something that came just before, and so on. And I think, in a sense, when you say nothing's really changed in those complaints 50 years later, I think what's been consistent over that time is basically the system. You know, the gallery system, the market, the collectors, which he refers to as parasites, and which is a little bit harsh, but still, he wasn't a harsh person. So it's the system that's the real continuity over that half century. But at the time, too, when Calvin Tompkins is doing these interviews, it's almost 50 years after the Armory show. And one of the interesting things that I picked up on in the book is that at the time of the Armory show, when Duchamp exhibited the nude descending a staircase, as Calvin Tompkins says, briefly, it was the most famous painting in America. Now, what did Duchamp do after that? Well, he didn't make more, and in fact, he didn't show for years. Today, I think if an artist did something and it became briefly the most famous painting in America, you know, it would look like there was the golden egg sitting there, and there would be, you know, hundreds of them produced in very short order. And that kind of feeding the system is really, really the big problem, I think. You know, I can complain about younger artists, but at the same time, you know, there's a certain fear factor. Like, am I going to be included? Am I going to be left out? Is the parade going to pass me by, and so on? But there was Duchamp. He made the nude descending a staircase, and he walked away from it, the most famous painting in 1913 in the United States.
You know,
it wouldn't happen today. Wouldn't happen today.
Well, when I was a young artist, nobody gave a crap about what I was doing. So Bob talks about the system, things are the same, but things actually aren't the same, because people do show younger, and they show very, in my opinion, a lot of very undeveloped work. So when I was starting out as a young artist, I didn't even feel entitled to show until for very, very long time, because I really felt I needed to learn how to paint and learn how to develop. And also the system wasn't, there was no system for me at that point, being either you know, as shy as I was, or being a girl, which is another whole topic. But basically what I'm saying is that I had many years to develop my work until somehow I made it, I forced myself out into the world, and people responded. But I think that, you know, it is different. There is a difference right now. And when I was, you know, in my 20s, I'm not saying what I was making was horrible. It was just unformed. And that it does, it's, you know, art, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime, and it's never going to end. And I'll always be a young artist in a way. Because, anyway, that's what I want to say.
Well, my response to that is to be showing right out of the gate and selling and putting a lot of art out, we could say prematurely. I just think it means that some years down the line, there's a lot of art there that people are going to really regret is out in public. You know, they can't really bring it back. They can't say, I didn't do that, you know. Make your mistakes in the studio, not in public.
I think I have a very naive outlook still, which in a constructive, in a positive sense. I mean, in terms of what I try to do and what I expect from a painting. I mean, I'm a very utopian thinker. I'm a very idealistic in my approach to things, and I expect a lot from artists and from a painting. And, you know, it's very clear to me, after having seen so much over all these years, when a painting is delivering something or not. If you can see the journey that the artist has been on, and the fact that they've come back with a certain evidence, and you want to feel that and interact with it. I mean, I believe in that painting should be involved with conveying knowledge and emotion and beauty and all kinds of poetical, intellectual energies. I expect that. And I feel that that's kind of, you know, people say, oh, he's such a sentimentalist, or he's not with it, or but I think that certain things do remain. I think there are constants. I mean, I personally, you know, I think we have no choice, even given our political circumstances, not to believe in the infinite perfectibility of each and every human being. I mean, I don't think we can. I've come to the conclusion that we can't not embrace that, because otherwise we're in a completely negative, nihilistic, untenable situation, which we probably are in. but to have a personal attitude and approach to life is what I think you're requesting. This is what I think.
I remember, and this is open to everyone. I remember, I want to say in the early 90s, you were on a panel, I think, with Sherry Levine and Jeff Koons and maybe Peter Halley, and you said something that stayed with me all these years, all that time. You said, you may not have used the word responsibility, but that's what I brought to it. In a sense, there's this idea that the artist really does have responsibility, and what you said that was too is changing the visual landscape. And that's why I open it to all of you, because, you know, it seems like some kind of old-fashioned idea. The artist has some sort of responsibility to the society in which they are living. You know, when we met a week ago in Philip's studio, and we spoke for about an hour and a half. so that we weren't going to come into this cold. And it was so interesting because I'm never usually taken for a loop when someone asks me a question, and Stanley just said, "Well, what do you think art should be, do?" And it's an important question, and but I don't know how you all feel about that. Is there a responsibility that artists have to change the visual landscape?
If the art world's so complex, and I think now even with painting, I mean, I'm in the same school as Philip. I'm really dedicated to painting. I'm into beauty, if I dare say that in this town, and I think that. But now I think if you go into a young artist studio and you mention an artist, they pull out their computer and they look them up right away, and they go, oh, that's what I'm looking at, and it's just I think it's very different. I mean, there's a lot of things called painting, it's not like one thing is called painting, and I think it's really very different in terms of like I personally I'll go out and look at I'm still involved with Cézanne, so I think that, if you're really involved in the tradition of painting and really want to get involved in the depth of painting, that's one thing. But I think, and I think economics comes into it too, and I think, and dealers come into it, and museums come into it, and even the one painting you showed us, this, I forget where it's from. It was just like a white with a canvas with a white mark on it. Mm. It doesn't really get very much into color. It doesn't really get very much into the complexities of what a painting can be. Mm. And I don't want to, I don't really care what I'm not to decide what young people paint or how much they want to use painting. But I think now there's lots of choices in terms of like how you're going to get involved in what an artist is, and even what painting is. I think there's always been lots of choices in terms of what an artist is. I mean, it's like sort of as an art school, sculpture sort of was if you didn't paint, you were in sculpture, and sculpture could be video, it could be anything, but painting was painting. And now painting kind of is like opened up to a lot of other possibilities. It's not sort of much like what I believe in, and how I grew up and how I saw painting, and like Joanne mentioned, the time I felt I had or time I was going to take to make the painting. I mean, even one reason I got into teaching, because I realized this is going to take me a long time to make these paintings, And I've been lucky in the sense it took me a long time to make my paintings, and because someday you can do that, maybe you'll think you paint 20 years and then no one's interested. I've been lucky that I painted long enough and people were interested. But I took a long time to make those paintings, and I felt that was something I wanted to do and needed to do as a painter, and kind of embraced that. But I don't know if economics, I don't know if the world now allows that. I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult I think now to paint. And painting, I mean, you're painting in all these, computers and things moving fast, and painting doesn't move like that. Painting's something totally different. Painting, the way you get knowledge from painting is a very special and very kind of slow thing. That's why I say it hasn't really changed. If I go look at a Goya, it's no different to me. You have to take time, and I have to go to Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about what Stanley was just saying, it takes a really long time to get good. And that doesn't mean that all older artists are good or either, but it does. Yeah, I really think that it just takes a long time to really get that thing that he's talking about sort of going in the studio. And I think I just know for me, it's taken a long time for me to get to a point where I have no anxiety, where the anxiety is gone, and where I feel like I can move the dialogue forward, and I don't really care what anyone thinks, and I just do it.
Well, that's also going back to 50 years ago, 1964. Duchamp in these interviews says, and part of this will be paraphrased, the general feeling today is quick art. art for the moment, which doesn't care about the future or the past. That, I think, has been characteristic of the whole century. Slow work is considered bad. You must do a painting at the most in an afternoon, otherwise you're stupid. You're not considered important at all. But what Duchamp was advocating is not 5 minutes, not 5 hours, maybe 5 years. And he says there's an element of slowness of the expectation that adds to the possibility of producing something that will be durable and will be significant. You know, the way things are today, something's put up immediately, and something is, the price goes up immediately, and everyone's talking about that. You know, I don't think it can last. I think it's getting kind of used up. It's like a kind of revolving door for me. That's how I see contemporary art today. And it's spinning around, and people, they want to take their chance, so they jump in and they get spun around.
You know, it's very hard to say where all this is going, but I mean, when we look at the 19th century, it was basically my least favorite century. And it just in terms of, and if you, I mean, you mentioned Cézanne, so if you look at the 19th century, and they worked very hard. A lot of those 19th century academic painters really made these things. They took a long time to make them. They're very polished academic, you know, salon paintings, or however you want to describe them. And then, but they seem rather empty and dead. A lot of these 19th century academic works. And then, when Cézanne comes along, you finally you realize what he was responding to. Yeah. So he was coming out of an intolerable situation. So that can be good. I mean, to be faced with, you know, a lot of detritus can really make people, make young artists say, wait a minute, you know, it's time to have a sort of delayed gratification or something. Here that we need to spend more time sort of working and getting things moving in a more constructive direction. And just culturally speaking, I mean, I think for young artists who don't seem to be taught this in art school, is to figure out what the culture needs. What is it that we need right now, instead of what the market needs? What does the culture need? How do we give something to, as you said, the visual landscape, or to the development of history? How can this is what a young artist should be thinking about? How to sort of get involved in making a difference in the long term. What is the culture going to benefit from? In the future.
I think there are people. I still believe there are people and young artists who believe that and maybe are doing that. I don't know if we'll see them right away. I mean, I know I felt that way and thought that way, and I'm sure there are people, and here I am on the stage now, but I think people probably think that. You know, I still believe that, you know what I mean, even though what Bob's first statement is talking about, you know, what some people are doing, and I can understand why they're doing it, and I can understand how they're doing it, but I still think there's some people who really do go, you know, look at paintings and really see what they are and see what they give, and really want to be part of that trajectory and try to project that into the 21st century. Or maybe the 22nd century. I just think painting really offers something that's quite unique, and I think people see. I mean, sometimes I go to museums and galleries, and I love to watch, you know, you can tell they're artists and they're looking at the paintings and they're really studying. And I can think of myself when I was young, I used to go and really study. I mean, and watch these young kids. You can tell, oh, they're artists. They're looking at these paintings, they're trying to figure out how they're made, they're trying to figure out, like, you know, what they are, or why people like them, or why they're famous, and I think that goes on still. I truly believe that.
I just wanted to pick up with that, but with something Philip said about Cézanne and reacting against this kind of academic painting before, and saying, well, here's what I'm going to do, you know. So in a sense, you could say that the bad news is the good news. And it would be good if we could do something to make it even worse fast, because then we can get rid of it. In other words, now, Stanley, what
Not a
you're
good
saying,
idea.
No, really, no,
Bad
seriously,
enough.
I'm serious now.
Yeah, I know.
I wasn't before. When you say that you see people staring and looking and how is this done, I put something up now. This is an artist who's kind of big now, or getting big or something, David Ostrovsky. Do you think people stand in front, young artists starting out, for a long time and look at these and how is this made and get inspired? No, I think what Philip's saying is good. I think that any art that produces a kind of reaction or anarchy or throw that out, or I can do
Well, this artist is clearly
this even more.
He's coming from the sadhu tradition of northern India. He's an ascetic, ascetic monk, I believe. Sort of holding on to his sperm. It's it's really learning how to keep it in.
Well, that was something that Joanne was saying, because, we all go to art schools, and sometimes you see things that are, you're curious and you're interested, but not that often. And you were recently at a school, and you had an experience that brought up the whole idea.
Right.
And this fits with someone like David Ostrovsky, who, he talks a lot about trying to, when he goes to make a painting, forget everything he knows. And I would say a huge success, unbelievable success, because he studied with a very good painter. He studied with Albert Erlin. Albert. Yeah. Poor Albert Erlin has this guy out there saying, I studied with Albert Erlin. It's not his fault. People teach. You're not responsible for what the students do. But this idea of going into a painting and forgetting everything that brought up with Joanne.
A couple weeks ago, I went to an art school as a visiting guest artist for a few days, and it was so interesting to me, because I went in, this was a grad school, and I'm a painter. I went in as a painter, but there was no painting, which is fine. I'll talk about anything. But what happened was I went into the studios, and first of all, no one was making anything. There was nothing there. And when I walked, and the minute I would walk into the studio, literally each one of them took me to the desk and opened their computer to show me their ideas that were on the computer. And I was, I says, well, what are you gonna make? Or, I understand it's early in the semester, but, what do you do all day here and paying probably a lot of money for this school? And it really depressed me on the train coming back, because, there was basically, I guess what we're talking about is this de-skilling that's happened, where people don't draw. They don't even seem like they read. And believe me, like Stanley, I know plenty of young artists that are very dedicated, but maybe we just won't hear from them for a while, as maybe it should be. But sort of the de-skill, the romanticizing of the de-skilling, or the rise in importance of showing that you had a good quote earlier, Bob, about it takes a lot of energy to show that you don't care, or it takes a lot of effort to make work that looks like you don't care. And what's wrong with caring? What's wrong with being a grad student and actually caring about learning how to make something? That's me. But I was going to point to David, the other one that you pointed to that just sprays the thing. I mean, the arrogance to me, that's arrogance. It's just arrogance.
You bring up a good point. Why would someone take the time to go to art school and spend the money to go to art school and not want to be taught how to do something, to unlearn? But it's worse than that, because in a sense, first, I don't think you can teach someone to be an artist. That's not possible. You can teach people different techniques, skills. You can maybe show them things that they might not have seen before, which might open up some sensitivity to the world, whatever that would be. But you can't really teach them to be an artist. So maybe that's why they're going to art school, to unlearn, But it's worse than that, because somehow it's a whole legacy, I think, from the 60s. And you saw it in art in the 60s as you saw it in music really in the late 70s, which is, anyone can be an artist, or everyone's an artist, like anyone can be in a band or play music. And the disaster in art is that whole anyone can be an artist thing, or to elevate de-skilling or something. It teaches people, who thought they were naive to also think they were talented. And that's kind of what we have on our hands, the legacy of that. Because I also think you can't just put a blame on the market. I think you have to put a huge blame on art schools.
Well, I think in an ideal society, every person should be an artist. I mean,
it's not an ideal.
Well, just in their own way. I mean, clearly, if you think, I mean, that's another one of my naive expectations, is that art will somehow lead to further democratization of our society, and people will understand their inner divinity and take it upon themselves to find the right way of changing their lives and society. I mean, I think that's asking a lot from a painting. But I think a lot, painting is just one part of the art world today. I mean, there are artists who spend more time on airplanes than they do in their studio. And they're traveling to all these international festivals, and their goal is to get in the newspaper, to make something that will capture the attention of the media. That for me is kind of a preposterous effort. I mean, to deliberately set out to do that. Well, that's a whole other kind of that's another art world that we're not even discussing this evening.
Maybe we are.
Also, are we? I mean, there are many art worlds.
Yes.
I mean, there are more art worlds than I can possibly, keep track of. It seems to me, and art fairs, and I mean, go to these art fairs. I mean, luckily, I feel as though occasionally I need to show up and to go and to say hello to people. But I mean, in terms of what there is to look at, there isn't a lot to look at. I mean, if you can go through these things in 10 minutes, for as long as it takes to walk from one end of the hall to the other.
Yeah.
I mean, what is all this stuff?
Why are you looking at me for, Philip?
If there's,
I don't know what the stuff is, though. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I've been to art fairs. I mean, art fairs. It's all for convenience. It's all for people to come and shop. It's all for people to come and get their stuff. I mean, art fairs, I say, really do give you great exposure. I mean, they're not places I think for artists to go. I mean, I've been to a few art fairs, I have to say, but they're hard for artists to go to because they're really just places people to go and just stock up on their stuff and get their stuff. And Miami Basel is there so that people who looking from South America can come up and buy art. If you go to Dubai, then everyone from Asia can get to Dubai to buy art. I mean, they're for convenience, but I don't know. They have nothing much to do with what we do. I don't think. As artists.
It's also a generational thing. We're all from more or less the same generation. I don't know what it would be like to grow up in a world today where going to fairs or something. It's a very normal thing, and looking at shows online. It's a very normal thing. And even doing things like looking at what someone did and then going back to your studio an hour later.
Well, not even looking at what they did, looking at someone did on a computer
words,
and then going back to your studio.
That seems perfectly reasonable or normal or acceptable.
Right.
And that's kind of something to really be up against, because, I was recently on the radio, and there was a person there who was asked to just join the conversation. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't care. I said, okay, sure, there's a younger artist here, and they'll be part of the conversation. And this person, it floored me, because at one point he asked me completely seriously, he's 25, if I had ever seen a work of art that had really moved me, because he hadn't. I almost didn't know what to say to that.
Was that off mic?
No, I'm tempted to not even to say his name on mic. But this is someone who's
He said this on the radio. He said this on the radio.
Yeah, people pay a lot of money for this person's art, and I think I have an image, but I'm not going to say who it is. What? I'm just going to show a picture. No, it's not him. It's not him. This is Artist Today. Not him. There, okay. He asked me if I'd ever seen a work of art that had really moved me, because he hadn't. And I wanted to say, you live in New York. There's all these museums. There are all these incredible collections. You've made some money. Get on a plane. Go to the what am I supposed to do? Force the person at gunpoint to go to the museum and sit in front of a painting? They're too busy.
I think he was just being provocative, and it was just trying to test your, test your.
No.
You don't want to believe. You don't want to believe that, huh, Phil? You don't want to believe that.
I can't. I can't.
You can't believe it.
I can't believe it.
I mean, the one thing I want to say, just because, we keep talking about, we're a generation, I think I can speak to everyone here, I'm not saying, all young artists are this, or the younger generation this. I'm not that, and I support a lot of young artists and help a lot of young artists. But I do see, just kind of what Bob is talking about, that there just isn't some sort of education. Didn't you grow up going to museums, or didn't you?
Well, don't you have to love art?
Or you have to love art to make great art. You have to be interested. You have to be fascinated by it. You have to be fascinated by your materials. And I don't mean necessarily just, the spray gun. It's like that has to go somewhere. And maybe in a few years we'll see if it's going to go somewhere or not. I don't know. But to me, it just seems like it's an end game a little bit. And that, I don't know.
But that's something else that's important. We all went through a kind of end game, and what was, if you think about appropriation, you think about the sort of collapse of modernism, which was hugely important, and what it meant is that everything could go on, everything could go forward. It wasn't the end. The end wasn't the end of anything. And maybe some people, and I'm not that generational either, this is, to keep the panel going. The end is just showing you there's a lot of possibilities. Because if it's the end, then don't bother. Then don't make any art and don't be an artist. But don't make art saying, well, it's the end and it's all over and everything's been done, so I can just do this 50 times. That whole kind of wearing down of modernism, which is our generation really inherited, I think created all of that really great and much of it very iconic art from the 80s on.
I think we're discussing, you talk about it in a theoretical sense, but we're talking about real emotions and psyches. So, you can say these things and have theories about the end of modernism, et cetera, but it comes down to what an individual is capable of doing, and finding the resources within themselves to do that. And that takes a lot of courage, actually. I mean, to do very silly things sometimes takes courage too. I mean, I suppose.
Well, I think that's what they're trying to say with the mark thing. I think they're trying to say that the silly things are trying to be provocative, like you say, by making a mark and thinking that that's being very courageous. And they're trying to sell that as something. And you know, to be an artist, I mean, the way I see being a painter, it does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage, as we're talking about. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort to really work through things, to really try to make something that inspires people, to really have an effect in the world. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot. It takes a studio, and it takes maybe you can't do everything. You have to stay home and paint, and that's a lot to ask of people, I think, being the painter. It's the art world, I think, the way it is now. I mean, there's lots of, like you said, lots of art worlds, and people don't really feel they want to take that kind of time or need to take that kind of time. I think what you're thinking about, but people should take that kind of time, or have to take that kind of time, the kind of art we're talking about. But I don't know if people, everyone feels that's important.
Well, I don't think there's ever been a lot of good work, ever, in the entire history of the world.
Right, of course.
You
just go to a museum, you see that.
I mean, there's never a lot of good work.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a struggle, and then certain things experientially start to resonate historically, or they fulfill a certain cultural need that was not entirely expected or anticipated on the part of the artist very often.
Yeah, that's true. But I think what we're talking about is like a small moment right now of what's happening, what you're seeing right now. Isn't that what we're talking about when you're showing us stuff? We're talking about a small moment of what we're seeing right now, sort of phenomena of like certain people who are not doing that much, who are getting paid a lot. Right? And what we're talking about? And people are thinking, well, how come these people are getting paid a lot for that mark? You know what I mean? Or what's going on? And I think for a lot of people it's very discouraging, because a lot of people are in the studio working night and day, and it's very discouraging.
Well, as well as there being a proliferation of artists and art worlds, there's also a proliferation of predators and scoundrels. There's more than a lot of
But I think, maybe that's the thing about art. Art is open to everything. I mean, that's a good thing about it. You know, it's open to everything. The predators and scoundrels and everything else.
You were about to say something.
That's art. That's the art world.
I lost my track. I was going to say one thing that, just in terms of this moment, I mean, I've had like 5 lives as an artist already. I've been down, I've been up, I've been down, but mostly down. And
good, you're a painter.
Because I'm a painter. And, you know, the idea of kind of reinventing yourself over and over and over and over again, I have done. And, you know, and it's this thing where, you know, like you get rejected from things and you keep going, and you get rejected from things and you keep going. I just would think, like, if I had had acceptance for what I did when I was in my 20s or 30s, the same type of attention that a lot of young artists now are getting in this kind of money, honestly, I don't even think I would emotionally have been able to handle that. And sometimes I wonder, sometimes I would love to be able to talk to somebody who's in that, to see just what does that feel like? Because I know, you know, that would have been kind of overwhelming for me, I think. And I'm just curious about that as well, like just what that would feel like.
I guess that would be a different sort of panel.
Yeah, probably. It would.
A support group. You know, one of the something that sounded absolutely perfectly fine in the title for this panel was the catchy. And where do we go from here? And I thought, well, I don't know. Why did I put that on the end of the title and of the panel?
I don't know.
But you know, often you have to ask a question without. It's a rhetorical question, and you don't have an answer. You don't even have a rhetorical answer. But I would say, you know, in a sense. And again, you're right, Philip, when you say, oh, you can say this, you can say that, but this is about our feelings, this is about our work, and this is our investment, and so on. You know, I'm not making art. I'm on the side, and I'm seeing what people do, but I've been on the side for a long time. You know, I've seen 30-plus years go by. So I've seen, you know, I feel like I've seen everything until recently. But, and also, you know, I'm someone very interested in minimal art, in conceptual art, in you know, art that's invisible, you know. It's not like I'm some Philistine and painting has to be painted or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, you know, against younger art. I worked with younger artists for 30 years. I still do. But where do we go from here kind of brings up something that maybe isn't so much for the artists. And it's more for critics, and it's more for curators and museum people. And, you know, if they can just drag themselves away for a minute from the pots of money, you know, people in galleries. Because any moment that's significant really involves a kind of contesting of what came before. There's a questioning, you know, the questioning the dominant systems, the discourse, the past, all of that. That's a kind of motor that drives things forward. And my bigger complaint, or that everyone's tired of now, is that it's so conservative and so complacent in general, at least where the spotlight is shining. You know, there's a kind of obedience to that system, you know, and I don't think that's moving anything forward. But again, it's probably more that sort of, whatever that contesting will be, it has to happen around the art and the artist. It's not a studio thing. That's another panel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's not a studio thing, you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot. I mean, I think artists, I mean, painters probably right now, I think, would like to ask a lot more from curators and critics. And there's, I think, amongst, I'll say this, I think, amongst artists, I think, at least I talk to, people wonder about that. You know, are the museums, are the critics being really that courageous? It doesn't seem like a very courageous time. And that's something I think a lot of artists think about, you know, when they go see shows. Or can a painter, you know, because, like, you know, people want to be entertained. So, like, you know, with Documenta or with, you know, the art fairs, is there really a place for the painters in this? And that, people who are really trying to really make sit-down paintings, that's a big question. And do museums really think that a painting show can generate the kind of money they want a show to generate? Well,
there's a show coming up very soon, mid-December. I think the opening's December 14 at MoMA, which is a painting show. And
I'm not in it.
Well, none of you are in it. Why would you be in? It's called The Forever Now.
Oh, that's probably why I'm not in it.
And it has a subtitle, Contemporary Painting in an Atemporal World, organized by Laura Hoffman. And, you know, I looked at the list of artists today. There's 17 artists. And I looked at the basic idea is that it's an atemporal world, and these are the paintings that people make in an atemporal, you know, and that comes from William Gibson, writer William Gibson. I didn't even know people still read William Gibson. And I remember, you know, those books of the mid-'80s, the famous one, the reason he's even known is because a famous movie was made, Blade Runner. Is that, no, that's not his movie. But the books he wrote in the mid-'80s, he wishes he wrote that book. The books he wrote in the mid-'80s were already they were already dated within a few years because he was dealing with the technology of the moment, which of course is completely obsolescent immediately. And I thought, well, that's odd to have William Gibson as a kind of touchstone for this show about the forever now and painting and all that. And I looked at a list of artists, and some of them aren't really painters. That's okay. And some of them really, really are painters. You know, people like Amy Stillman. You talk about taking a long time to develop. I think she worked for 10 years in the studio before she showed anything what she was doing. You know, nobody would do that today. But that show's coming up. You know, we'll see. And it mixes abstraction. It mixes, there's figurative painters and so on. But, you know, when we talk about a kind of responsibility, I brought it up earlier, of the artist, and now I'm saying maybe the question is really for critics and curators, the museums and so on. I just thought, you know, contemporary painting in an atemporal world. I didn't even know if this is what this even means, if it's contemporary, because in a sense, when you package and put these things together, it's very manufactured. You know, and one of the things that's really problematic, this idea of atemporality, is this statement about how the art doesn't really reflect the moment in which it's made. And that goes back to the studio a week ago, and you asked me what art's supposed to do. And I think I said something like, it's supposed to reflect the moment in which it's made. So here's a whole painting show based on, well, the artists don't have to worry themselves about that, but I think it's more about how curators and museums don't have to really stick their neck on the line and say, this is what is going on now, this is what I believe in, and I'm taking a position about it. So to have it be atemporal and have lots of different kinds of painters and non-painters, you know, you're sort of hedging all your bets on a big public stage. I'm not so sure that's what people ought to be doing now in terms of, you know, where we go from here. Any response? No response.
For me?
I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I have to see the show. I don't know. I'm glad they're going to do a painting show, and we'll see. But like I said, I'll say I think that I don't see much happening. I don't know if people really feel. I mean, maybe we'll see if the modern or the painting show can really, if the museums feel a painting show or can really generate a lot. I mean, there's a lot of painters out there, I think, that mid-career artists who could definitely deserve some shows, you know, who've worked a long time, and you don't see them being shown in New York, and they're New York-based artists. So I'm waiting. I'll see the show and see what I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that you just have to. I always try to learn something from any exhibition, and I think the more I learn, the better an exhibition it is. So I'm always hoping to learn something. So I hope,
you know, I know when I'm in Europe and I go to the Byler, you know, I'll say this, that when I go to the Byler Museum, I think the shows I see there and how they're put together and how the kind of intelligence, the kind of expertise, the quality of the shows are always, to me, outstanding, which I don't tend to see so much in New York. I'm saying, you know, stick my neck out.
Yeah, I think it just seems in New York, maybe Los Angeles, it seems that just from what I see that the curators, they're just afraid to take chances on someone that's not sort of the normal thing, or they just don't want it. They want to show what everyone else is showing, just the way everyone wants to buy what everyone else is buying. And I think it takes sometimes a special person to look outside of that box. It's just unfortunate that maybe the whole system doesn't support those type of odd thinkers or those wonderful collectors that just don't want what everyone else is buying or curating. And I think those people are kind of a dying breed in a way. I mean, I know some of those people, and they're described to me sometimes by like, well, that, you know, he's a dying breed, you know, because those people don't really exist so much. And so, yeah, I'll see the show too.
We'll see the show.
I think
Next
it's
panel.
probably a good time to open up to questions if there are any. I don't know how this works, though.
Yeah,
Is
so we
there a
have
mic in the
2 microphones. We'll maybe try to keep it even and odd with that side of the room, but we'll come around. So shoot your hand up. Proximity wins first question.
Hi, I'm a big fan of all your works. So, I mean, I think that these are issues that a lot of people, they feel insulted by the abuse of art or abstraction. But I think that what's at stake is probably who wins the history, like a war or something. So it's like if the Nazis win, then they tell the history of like what happened. And I think that's really what's at stake with art, or not art, but just like what happens now, so it's like if this is the work that sells, like, oh, is this going to be, that's what's at stake. It's like, what's the history? What's the history that's going to be told? And I think that also that changes the way that, I think that is affected by the market media. And I think that a lot of what we've been talking about is sincerity, which is what I kind of feel like, maybe we're all missing when we read like about abstract painting from the American, 1940s and stuff. But that's what I think seems to be at stake is like, and then how do we treat people around us, But thank you.
I just want to ask that I agree with all that, but I think that questions ought to be questions from now on. Are there questions?
Yes, we have one here.
Hey, I've been all your work as well. I'll try to put this as a question. Bob, are you more so talking about, in referencing that show that's coming up at MoMA, your desire for a statement of certain ideals or a hope for idealism in people's products as curators or critics?
I was thinking about this earlier today that, when you take a job, you're being employed. And when you take a position, you have to stand up and say something. And I'd just like to see more positions taken in exhibitions.
Can I also follow up with another question?
Yeah.
Would be addressing the kind of like, to quote Salt's abstraction work, would you look at that as indicative of the time and its relationship to a increased level of consumption in our society in general and like the ramping up of the myth of technological and societal advancement?
Can I just say yes? Next question.
No more questions.
The title, I believe, for this talk or this panel was the "Where is abstraction now?" And I was kind of waiting for you to deal with that question. I just wondered if you could.
I don't think that was the title.
I'm sorry. I thought it was about where's abstraction. No? Where's abstract art now? No. Okay. Got that wrong.
I wanted to say, I didn't have a chance to say this, but I think that when I started talking about art as visual research, I think that abstract art enables more research to take place than other kinds of pictorial manifestations. And I personally am interested in a synthesis of many different forces. So I think a painting is a crucible in a sense that it can meld many different forces, and that's what abstraction has historically permitted. And I think that's what the best work has, that level of tension, and you can feel these forces being contained and grappled with, and we do see that today.
Another question?
Could you possibly theorize, let's say, a representative here who was articulate enough of this type of painting? How would they describe their context and their reasoning? I know we're making fun of the posing and the little bit of work that they do, but I'm sure they feel some responsibility. I wonder if you could kind of construct a little bit of how they would respond to what you're saying.
I don't know. You know, I mentioned some of these artists a week ago to Joanne and Philip and Stanley. They'd never heard of any of them. So the question kind of falls on me, unfortunately.
Well, that's not entirely true. That's not, I've heard of I mean, but I know that, I understand I have a lot of sympathy with like a very negligible response in terms of minimal, like this gestural thing and having to do with the overconsumption, like this is got all these products. I mean, in a sense, I understand that. I've seen that work, and I've seen some of these artists. I'm not entirely unsympathetic to that, but I'm more sympathetic to your point of view in terms of what one should expect, rather than a kind of like a very lackadaisical. It seems a bit too easy, or a kind of just a politically kind of obvious response to the situation. But I didn't mean to sidetrack I'm not entirely. I mean, I'm not entirely ignorant of this work. It's just I can't. It's not a lot to experience there. And I agree with you in that respect.
I don't know what they would have to say to defend themselves. I mean, at one point, putting the panels together, I thought, well, why don't we have one, young artist? And I thought it was really kind of setting someone up, and probably shouldn't be done in public. I think that next week they could have a panel about us and talk about how we don't understand anything about what they're doing, and we're all passé and all that.
Well, I think that Bob setting this panel up is kind of and wanting to have this discussion, which is a very hard discussion and a very kind of delicate discussion, and maybe people want more from us than we're willing to say here. But I think that just that you bring it up and want to talk about it, or the people, I think just looking out here and seeing all these people here who want some kind of answers or expect something about that, just says it's going on, and people maybe don't really know how to really necessarily deal with it. Maybe there's a lot of frustration, maybe there's a lot of concern, or someone just said, well, it's like a war, you win or you lose. I just think there's a lot people are asking and don't quite know, how do you move from here, or what the art world was and what the art world's turning into, or where it's going to go, or talking to whether young painters I know who are working jobs and telling me they're painting in closets, to older painters I know who are working and feel that where do I go, how do I get my work out, or how do I deal with this? And then they look at this work of certain young artists where they just make a mark and they're getting $20,000 a canvas. There's a lot. There's a lot happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole culture is set up right now as basically winners or losers. So but there's vast differences and vast distances between winners and losers, and the way that the art world is set up is you're either winning or you're losing, and that is so depressing.
Yeah, it's not
sports. So depressing. I mean, if you look at the three of us, and even Bob, we've been working, we're a good example for young artists.
We are? Okay.
Okay. You know, hang on. That artist I was
I'm
on
glad
the
to hear
radio. That artist I was on the radio with said, "Oh, I'm really fed up with all these people buying my paintings and selling them 6 or 8 months later and making all this money on my back. And I'm not going to make anything now that anybody can buy. I'm going to do, zines and print things and, make things that people can't sell so easily and so on." And he said, "And I'm closing my studio, and I'm getting rid of my assistants." And I said, "Oh, you have assistants, you have a studio. That's nice." And he said, "And I'm getting rid of my studio, and I'm not going to do this anymore, And I just said, "How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 25." And I said, "Well, why are you in such a hurry? You should be saying all this when you're 50. You're like, you've sped it all up." But that's the world today. But he was fed up with being used. There's a funny thing. I was afraid to do it, but this guy, I won't use I'll use the more poignant one. Yeah, he's sitting there. Look, okay. I went to his website. And there's something, I was afraid to click on it thinking, oh, it'll like infect my whole computer or something. He does that intentionally. I was just a little, you can't just click without thinking first. And he has this thing on his website where you can click and see the complete list of all the people who've sold his work, which I thought was great. But I wouldn't look at it.
No.
Is there another question? Somewhere.
Okay, hi, I think this is a great discussion. When you started the panel, you mentioned that it was mostly men born from 1980 to 1989, and do you think that's still the dominant force in the market today?
Yes. Yes.
It's so depressing.
I got most of my information.
It is, isn't it?
I got most of my information where most people get their information. I'm recent Phillips auction catalog. That's my source. Someone else?
Oh, Bobby's last. Let's see, Joanne.
Just to play devil's advocate for a minute.
That's my part.
What?
That's my part. Okay.
This is directed to you. Couldn't it be argued that the, say, vacuousness of some of the paintings that you showed by people other than those on the panel is a reflection of this cultural moment that is kind of dominated by, mega buck collectors?
Yeah. There's a reflection of the current moment.
And don't we need some kind of oppositional painting to expose this culture in this moment?
Well, I think that there's a frustration there with, how much power artists have, and I think that's a big thing right now. I think how much power do artists really have? And, money dominates. I mean, I think that's the thing. I'll just leave it at that. How much power do artists have?
Well, artists have all the power.
In your studio?
Artists have all the power.
Well, I think, I don't think so. I think in the studio they do. But I think, I don't think that, I understand what you're saying, Philip, and I kind of want to agree with you, but I think really when it comes to people getting out and people showing their work and people, the frustration that people have and people feel, because you can do your work. I can make my work, but if can you get your work out there? Can you show it? How do I do that? How do I go about that? I don't think that really artists have that much power.
Well, I always, when I first thought about presenting my work, I think you benefit a lot from having an exhibition. You learn a lot. And I wanted to have an exhibition, and I was showing it to my artist friends. And my artist friends pointed me in this direction or that direction and made the contacts. That's how it works.
Well,
it's not like artists are going, maybe it doesn't work that way anymore. I think from my own experience, artists were the ones that determined where other artists would show? You know, what works best?
Well, I think, well,
You know, artists-
I don't know if I want to get in this discussion too much or go too deep, but this young woman, she's very frustrated, and she says, well, there are all these young guys, it's guys, and right now, there's a lot of women painting, and a lot of young women painting, a lot of old women painting, a lot of painters, and they feel frustrated by all this. I don't know if it's, I mean, I know what you're saying, that's the way it's supposed to work, but I don't really know if that works that way for everybody. You know, it's an even field. I know myself, I didn't feel with even field, you know, when I was a young artist. I don't want to bring up race in here at all, but I know it wasn't even field. And I don't think it is an even field. I don't think it's an even field for a lot of young female artists. It's not an even field. I know it does work to some degree that way, and people, I know, I taught for a long time at art schools, and people come to art schools and people say, well, I showed this work, and I just got a show. And they just say that, it's like, they just got a show. But I think there's a lot of factors in terms of who gets to be the artist, you know. And I know, I think there's a big romance being the artist, and I love the romance, but in reality, I think it's not an even field.
I think we have time for one more. We have time for one more question, if there's one more.
Hey guys, thank you for taking the time and gather tonight. I guess I have a two-part question, and can you guys hear me?
You gotta talk up a little. I can't hear you.
All right, sorry. Thank you for gathering tonight. I guess I have a two-part question. And all your points, I feel like everybody can generally generate intergenerationally and agree that there is inequality with gender in the art world and has been there for a long time. There's inequality with wealth, and it's only growing. And you know, we can open up any major publication from The Guardian to The Economist, and to have that confirmed with statistics and analysis. And it's a global affair. I guess to me, there's a little bit. It's a little bit myopic in some respect, because I do feel there are a lot of burgeoning artists that are making interesting, captivating work, and I think maybe some of it is an effect and a kind of common denominator with what you brought up with Lucian Smith. You know, we can go as far as talking about the Stillhouse Group or Ito's work is maybe a difficulty in engaging in a digital conversation. And I feel maybe some of it is, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, some of it might have to do almost to the same degree as early digital, you know, in cinema in the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw really kind of hackamany overuse of, you know, special effects. And it was sloppy, and finally we're kind of getting to a point where it's becoming a little bit more convincing, you know, and maybe this is somewhat of what you're trying to get to. And simultaneously, as a second aspect to what I'm trying to bring up would be like Richard Smith, you know, Richard Prince, pardon me, not Richard Smith, Richard Prince's new work. And I would love to hear your thoughts on Richard Prince's new work, and I guess digital, of artists' relationship to early digital media and how it's changing the landscape. Thank you.
Is that a question? Is that a question?
What do we think?
Is your question that, are you saying that you don't think old people understand digital work? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think he's...
Critics are responding to it, with the exception of Jerry Saltz. So yeah, I mean, I would say that besides Jerry, a lot of people came out actively kind of being taken back by the most recent offerings from Richard Prince.
What did he do?
Well, I'm not disagreeing, but I would love to hear from the panel.
On Richard Prince?
What did he do?
What's he want to hear?
Wait, what?
Is that a sarcastic
Louder.
question? They're Instagram portraits.
Instagram photos.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's up now. It's up now. It's up now. I haven't seen the show. I know it's up at Gozian now.
I don't know. I think the worst way to try to stay with it is to try to stay with it. And that was not you know. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again.
Thank you all for coming.
Did we say anything? Did we do anything? What do you think, Bob? Huh? Did they love it?